Welcome, everyone. And today I'm going to share with you some information about near death experiences. It was only a few years ago that near death experiences were not part of the collective consciousness. They weren't discussed very often. And even though millions of people had these experiences, they didn't talk about them for fear of ridicule or just because they didn't want anyone to think they were crazy. But in fact, millions and millions of people have had these experiences and continue to have them. It wasn't until Dr. Eben Alexander wrote his book about his near death experience that it gave this topic some credibility because he was a Harvard neurosurgeon. So he could bring some credibility to the topic. And other people have joined in since then. There's a romanticism about the near death experience. It's been romanticized because it's a perfect topic for movies and for television shows. You can do a lot with the cinematography with the idea of a near death experience visually. You can create the light, the tunnel, a beautiful landscape, heaven, all of that. So all of those effects of a near death experience don't necessarily take place for everyone, but it does make great fodder for television and movies. So I often have people say to me, how can I have one of those near death experiences? That's exactly what I need to improve my life. Okay, I'm going to just give you one word for that: wrong. That is so wrong because it doesn't make your life better. It's just another complication in your life. Because the other comment that I hear from people, and these are the people who've had near death experiences, is my life has gotten much more complicated since I've had a near death experience. Why? Because people have a lot of after effects, which I wrote a book about near death experience after effects, life after near death. And there are many after effects from NDEs, and they're written about in this book. Many of them are cataloged along with cases in this book. But one of the after effects from near death experiences is this enhanced consciousness that people return with from their NDEs. NDE is an abbreviation for near death experience. And people return with this enhanced consciousness. They go out into the universe in their NDE, and what happens to them? They get filled up, tanked up at the universal consciousness filling station. That's the only way I can describe it. They get a little bit more consciousness when they're out there, and they return to Earth with this enhanced consciousness. Their energy has been altered. And that enhanced energy and consciousness is then translated into a number of after effects. But the bottom line is that enhanced consciousness, while it sounds great, I mean, who wouldn't want to be more conscious, right? I mean, everybody. But the problem is that we are wired to live here on Earth in a material world. We're not wired to live partly on Earth and partly in the universe, or even all in the universe, right? So people who've had NDEs come back with too much consciousness, and now they're walking with one foot on Earth and one foot in the universe because part of them is out in the universe now. They have more consciousness than the average human being on Earth, and they're titrated differently. The percentage of their consciousness is much higher. So that gives them, yes, some special abilities. They might be psychic or mediumistic or be able to have any number of other after effects, but it also makes them unwieldy. They have difficulty navigating life on Earth because they are now no longer just this rational left brain person, and the heightened consciousness intrudes and doesn't go away. It's not something that you could manage. You can't just tell it to take a back seat or go away because it's there permanently, and it intrudes, and it wants a voice, and it wants to be heard. So you can imagine, as you're going through your day as an NDEer, you've got your left brain telling you one thing and you've got your consciousness telling you something else. And those two things are happening at the same time. So it could be very confusing and very difficult to manage. So for those of you who think that you'd like an NDE, think about that because it's not really what it's cracked up to be. It's hard to manage it. And it affects every other part of your life. It affects your relationships. It affects your jobs. It affects even your taste, what you eat, how you live your life, where you decide to live, your friends, all of that. Because now you have this other voice in you, your consciousness, that has its own mind about how you should live your life. So you're really being pulled in two directions at the same time. That is one of the after effects of near death experiences. There's some nice things about having enhanced consciousness. I wouldn't be able to be a psychic and a medium if my consciousness wasn't, if I didn't have the degree of consciousness that I have. And to me, that's a wonderful thing because I get to help all of you. And that means a lot to me. But there are other trade offs that come with all of that. So it's just something to think about. Now, are NDEs anything like what they appear on TV? The answer to that is it depends. So some people do have extraordinary experiences in their NDE. They may have a life review, they may go through a tunnel, they may see a light, but not everybody does. And if you have had what you think is an NDE, but you didn't have some of those elements, don't despair. It doesn't mean that you didn't have an NDE. It just means that you've watched a lot of TV shows and movies that show you all these elements, and therefore you identify NDEs with all of those elements. But the bottom line for an NDE, the definition for an NDE, is really that you come back transformed, unable to go back to your previous life. The definition of an NDE is not that you went through a tunnel. It's not that you saw a light or that you had a life review or that you saw fantastic landscapes. The definition is that you come back to your life transformed, unable to go back to your previous life. So we'll talk more about NDEs and spiritually transformative experiences and some of the after effects and how we define them and what they mean in future videos. But for now, I'm just going to thank you for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Hit the bell so you'll be notified when a new video is released. And we'll continue to provide you new content, fresh content in the coming weeks. So thank you.